This is the Project Management Podcast. We bring project management to beginners and experts. Find us on the web at pm-podcast.com or send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com. Hello and welcome to part 2 of episode 161. I am Cornelius Fichtner. This is the Project Management Podcast. Nice to have you with us. Just as a recap, earlier this year, PMI announced that CEO Gregory Balestrero was going to step down and that Mark Langley would be his successor. Because I'm part of the PMI's new media council, I had the opportunity to record a group interview by the new media council with Greg and Mark. Last week, you heard part 1, and this here is part 2. We begin with Greg Balestrero recounting a story showing how project management has come a long way in the past 9 years.
I met a woman who I'd originally met in Anaheim, and she was from Colombia, Bogota. Not Bogota, I can't remember the city now. I will by the end of the meeting. And she was with her daughter, who was 20 years old. Both very energetic people. Her daughter was born like a month before she got her PMP. And she said now she's 20 years old. She's at Rutgers University. And she's majoring in marketing, coming here to learn about project management because she thinks she might be interested in it. And here's a person in marketing that thinks that a master, she's trying to figure out a master's in business administration or a master's in project management, which would be better. Now, 9 years ago, they didn't have the choice. 9 years from now, they'll be wondering why they might need an MBA over a master's in project management. Now that would be cool.
And they'd already be in an undergraduate course for PM.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Yeah, 10 years ago, they didn't have the project managers you're talking about, they were all ad hoc. Not all, but many of them were ad hoc. I mean, IBM started its center in 1996, I think.
Right.
So we're still only talking 14 years ago. 10 years ago, we were still talking about ad hoc or accidental project managers, and that was more the norm than it certainly is today, although it's still out there.
Yep.
Let me ask you a question that is at the heart of this group here, the New Media Council. Where do you think social media fits into project management today, and where do you see it going, and how is PMI going to implement it, well, in the next version of the PMBOK guide, maybe?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll take on the PMBOK guide one last, but the interesting part about social media, especially some of the more common ones, is it's absolutely at the core of what PMI has been about for 41 years, which is most professional associations, and PMI, I think, is a leader in this area. They're about two things. One is access to technical knowledge, so project management, program management knowledge, whatever form that takes, tools, templates, standards, articles, white papers, whatever form it takes. And the other one is networking. Well, traditionally, 41 years ago, a dozen people got together in a restaurant and they talked about project management. Social networking, the web, is just the ultimate manifestation of knowledge and networking. So it's absolutely integral to PMI. It's integral to PMI's strategy, and it's integral to PM. How we're implementing, you're seeing pieces of it. I think we've ripped apart PMI.org twice since I've been here. The most recent one's much better than the last one. So we'll continue to make PMI one of the vehicles to deliver knowledge and networking to our members and other stakeholders. Certainly the community of practice at the heart of that transition from SIGs and colleges was this online knowledge and networking strategy. So that's integral, and it'll be more. The other part we do to kind of more support that it's not just what we build online, is we also go where our members are, right? So we're a little slower adopting than some other organizations, but to be fair, but we're now out on the Facebook and YouTube and so on and so on. That because you can't just rely on everybody to come to you anymore. We have to go out where the members are, where the community is, and that's an essential part of our strategy. But we also have to have enough value in PMI where they'll want to stay and engage with us, because I spent a little time in my career in the .com world, and which was fascinating. I enjoyed it. It was like having 2 MBAs in about 15 months. The pace of it was, I had more case studies than any MBA student would ever have.
What the true value of an option is.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. I was the wealthiest man on paper. No, but it was it was a real introduction to the network effect. It was a big term if you spend any time, and it was all about the network effect, and it really dates back, believe it or not, to the telephone. Is my recollection, if I remember from school, but which is one phone has a certain value. When you have 2 phones, it has a little bit more value. When you have 3, and so on, the network effect is incremental, exponential to that value, right? Well, the same's true with the web. So for us, we need to create enough value at PMI that there's a network effect, there's a benefit to all the members, because there's enough coming and engaging, exchanging ideas, and making connections online. And so we'll do it within PMI, but we'll also do it where they go, because we need to be relevant.
I think the use of social media is in play in the profession. We heard some people yesterday in the panel, particularly with Norton Hospital Systems, where they had used the SharePoint site, for example, for sharing documents, carrying on dialogue, solving problems in real time, and so on. Not necessarily supportive of the tool that they use, but that's not the point. The point is that's become mainstream, and they're taking that as an archive to move it to the next step. IBM's been building an expert system for project professionals for 16 years. The power of that is incredible. Jim Johnson at Standish with the Chaos Chronicles, 16 years of data. I mean, it's all there, and it needs. And even the keynote speaker yesterday talked about taking all this data and trying to use it in an expert system way, and then sharing it. All of that's there. What we have to both look for and be fearful of, or not fearful, respectful of, is the future. Because the rapidity of it, the speed of integration it's not the speed of change, it's the speed of integration now. And what that's going to manifest, and how do we stay on top of that, I think is really going to be a challenge. What will it do for us? That great Sulu is on TV with the 3-dimensional TV.
Sharp television.
Yeah, and Despicable Me characters are jumping out. Okay, take that on an integrated technology with an iPad that's fully linked through cellular networks, and you got somebody walking around 24/7 managing projects, having communication. I mean, I don't even have a dream what the future is going to be with social media, but I do know that the part that we have to emphasize and where we need to work on is the social part, building people, because none of this matters if you don't have the right people doing it. And I gotta, it's all about people and relationships to succeed. Ordinary people do great things, but it's about the social side of that, and how the hell do we build leaders through Facebook? How do we do that? I'm serious. How do we build leaders through LinkedIn? How do we build leaders through social technology? That's where we come in. Mm-hmm. We're going to build the leaders. And that's the gap that social media will prevent. And it's a seductive path, and it's a danger that you get away from building leaders. It's all about networking. Well, we still have to build leaders to manage that network.
So maybe it exposes leaders rather than builds them.
Yeah.
The social media thing.
Yeah.
I actually had a question, since the microphone's pointing at me now.
That's serious.
I'm really, it's impressive. It's a little scary when it's right here. I'm really interested in the Agile thing. I'm excited about the fact, you walk up the steps here and you see, pmi.org, /Agile. And I think it's an important direction, for PMI to head into. You're talking about the broader project management community, and the Scrum Alliance is part of that. You've done a little bit of work with them, and effectively, and what it looks like you're doing is creating another standard certification or whatever within the context of PMI. How are you going to get the very best Agile knowledge, Agile experience that exists in the world today, whether that's through, Scrum Alliance or somebody else, because a lot of those folks are already sort of enrolled and engaged in another organization, another set of certifications. How are you going to make sure that what you have out there is best in class?
Well, it's a great question, and one of the things we started to do, we did it for two reasons, well, three. One, they invited us, but last March of 2009, when Greg and I were invited to come to the Scrum Gathering, not a meeting, not a conference. It was a Scrum Gathering. It was in Orlando, and we were asked to come. Actually, one of the IT&T SIG leaders arranged it. Dave Pryor asked us, would we be willing to come down and meet with the leadership of the Scrum Alliance? And we said, certainly. And then we did it because we were asked. We also did it because there's an immense misperception, we think, in the project and program community around PMI's view of Agile, but more importantly, what the PMBOK guide is or isn't, what the PMP is or isn't, and we felt that we could actually benefit from being there as well. And it was also March, and it was in Florida, so we went for that reason too. And there was a shuttle launch that we actually got to watch from the front steps.
That was cool.
When I cool front, we time everything to really cool things, but
we're really cool people.
We are.
It's very important.
But not very humble though. But one of the things we began then was to build relationships. We already had our, as you know, PMI is much more than PMI staff. It's, it's all the communities of practice, it's all the chapters, it's all the volunteers. So there's deep relationships already in the Agile community among what I consider PMI. But Dave and others wanted to establish a connection at the top, at least of one of those Agile organizations, and we did. And from there, we began to deepen it. We sent our chair last year, 2009, Ricardo Vargas, to the Scrum Gathering in Brazil. He actually wore a T-shirt of Scrum because he was the only person in the whole meeting with a tie on. So he was the only formally dressed person. He felt bad, so they had given him a T-shirt earlier, so he put it over his tie, his shirt and tie. But so we began to develop relationships, and we did it, to your point, to make sure that we understood the Agile community, that they understood us, and we were building relationships because we needed to have that exchange and start that exchange again to help them understand us a little bit better, and for us to help them to help us understand it. Whether we ever have an Agile standard, I couldn't say. There's no plan to do that this time. As you know, Agile's a methodology. PMBOK guides at the framework and standard level. There's many other methodologies out there. So whether we go there, that depends. If an organization or government says we want PMI to do it, we might do it, sure. But right now, it's not really in. Our focus is more on people and helping project managers use Agile methods. Or project managers use other methods, but in this case, it's Agile. So we know that organizations and government, you heard this morning in the keynote, Vivek Kundra said it too as well, to some degree, in terms of being more Agile in what we do. There's a focus on that, and we need to help our 500,000 practitioners understand what that means when they go back to work. So that's been our focus.
So from a standard perspective, you see it as certain elements that are commonly used or best practices being incorporated into the current PMBOK standard versus establishing a separate one?
Yeah, well, we reference Agile. I mean, you guys are more as familiar as anybody with the way the PMBOK guide's organized. It doesn't go into the method level, but it certainly references, methods. What you might find is some kind of, auxiliary, guidebook or document that says, here's ways that our project managers use Agile methods, whether it's in engineering, construction, IT, other fields. That's one of the things we want the communities of practice to focus on, is developing. The PMBOK guide focuses on good practices, most projects, most of the time. What we don't have is emerging practices in there, because by the time they go from emerging to good, that's when they get in the PMBOK guide, and we don't have true benchmarked best practices in there. Although many of them are best practices, there's another level up here that says we've actually benchmarked organizations against those practices. The communities of practice, we'll use our current standards development process because it's endorsed by ANSI and ISO. Adds a lot of quality, we think, into the validity of the standard. But there's this front end of emerging, and there's this other level of best practices that the communities of practice and the entire PMI organization can really help us drive that we don't today. And that's it's actually another part of our future in the next several years.
And emerging and best practices are not necessarily the same. They're not mutually exclusive, but they're not necessarily the same. And I think to some extent, there are individuals who feel that this is a brand new practice, it's emerging, it's a best practice. It may very well be the worst practice possible for most applications, but the best practice for that situation. The fit is right for that situation. And not to go to Clinton as a guide for project management, but last night, specifically, we focus on the things that separate us rather than the commonalities that bring us together. And that's an example where the rigidity of a waterfall method of project management didn't work quite well for Agile. So Agile became an Agile discipline, very different. Well, in fact, there's still many commonalities. It's just a different application. So I think we need to seek commonalities in the discipline going forward rather than constantly looking at it, and be rigorously honest about commonly accepted practice, emerging, and best practice. They are three very different things. They may all end up being the same at some time, but they're three very different things. So,
question we talked about earlier about leadership. You're also both managing the professional organization called PMR. How do you approach the transition from leadership?
well, between us, he asked me to get out as soon as possible. And,
I actually wrote a letter, put his name on it, sent it to the board, saying I'm going to retire at the end of my contract. And I just used the stamp that we have in the office that had his signature.
yeah, and I had to be sedated when I found out.
Yeah, he got a call from the chair saying, why did you make this decision? He said, what decision? I don't remember writing the letter. I said, well, your memory hasn't been slipping recently, Greg. I think if I could start.
Sure,
since,
yeah.
And you can fill in, but one of the things, and I'm going to give Greg an immense amount of credit, and he should get a lot of credit for this, because we network with this professional associations of all year, every year for the last 9 years. You know, we have a peer group just like you would in your profession. You guys are peers, so you might talk about what's going on in social media. So we network with the executives of associations, and I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds of them every year. And one of the things that I found as I was working with my peers is very few professional associations take on succession as a critical or strategic aspect of their leadership in the organization. So when we look to other associations for true succession, it's not in their mindset. It's just not how they think yet, although it's becoming more prevalent. So the credit I give Greg is that in 2005, after we got some of the chaos settled from joining the organization, which was really, Greg joined in October of 2002, so spent a year or two kind of getting everything under control. He turned his eyes towards succession, and we made it part of our quarterly conversation was my professional development and what my interests were beyond my role, in my role and beyond my role. We formalized a succession process, and with working with the chair at the end of 2005 and in 2006. And PMI and Greg began to help me prepare to be the chief executive of an association, whether it's PMI or somewhere else. Obviously, we hoped it was all PMI. And no, I can tell you that very few other associations have this. I network with some of the largest ones in my current role and in my future role. And although you talk about it, it was nothing on the level of formality that we did. Engage the chairs of the board and engage specific activities over a 3-year period. And it was Greg's leadership and vision that made it as formal a process that put me in the position to be prepared to even want to consider to go into the role. So I won't go into all the steps and all that, but there was really by the time the board's decision, or Greg's announcement rather, was a retirement and their need to go find a new CEO, I had performed every aspect of the role because of what Greg had put in place working with me.
See, and that's why I said when you asked me what do I consider the 2 accomplishments, that's why I said that's number 1. Because it's the role of a leader, especially a chief executive, to make sure that the organization is not dependent on the one. Leadership is systemic. It's as much about the followers as it is the leaders. And you have to prepare the organization for your departure. It's counterintuitive to a person who's a strong leader. It really is, because you think as a strong leader, I'm the source. But the fact is that leadership is systemic. Mark's excellence is a representation of my leadership. His leaders, she's like a chief marketing officer for us. Unless she excels, we don't excel. So it's incumbent upon Mark to make sure she excels, and that her life and her capabilities are enriched. And so we've worked on this since 2005 to get Mark ready to take my place, even though I didn't know when I might get hit by a bus, I might walk away, I might retire. Doesn't matter. It's incumbent upon the CEO to make sure that he recognizes that leadership is a system, and which goes to the immediate issue of transition, which makes this almost seamless. Now, Mark's got a transition time just like anybody. What's his structure going to be like? Where's his focus internally and externally? But I can stand tall to the board and say, we're in compliance. I walk away and we're in compliance, which is what they need to worry about. Are you in compliance with the policies? One of the policies, do you have an individual that is fully competent in the processes of the CEO? And he is. He's ready. Now it's up to him. And my legacy is, don't forget that it's about who takes your place, not about you all the time. And believe me, that didn't come naturally with me, because I like me. I like talking about me, as Mark would tell you.
Yeah, well, so those quarterly conversations we had, well, they were really monologues, but, it was... But it worked out in the end. But he's actually got a good sense of humor, too.
Yeah.
And plus, he's leaving in 2.5 months. The other thing I wanted to say, though, about this is, because the greatest part about, I think, what we did, Greg, is that we didn't stop with the one position.
Absolutely.
We actually have succession plans in place for every key position all the way through the management team and into other technical positions. And maybe you'll never see them stand before a crowd at a leadership meeting or a Congress, but these people have critical jobs for PMI. And we looked at the entire staff org chart, and we go through a quarterly process that identifies, these positions, these people, how they're being prepared, who could backfill their positions, and how do we develop them to prepare if they're interested, because the other key is willingness to lead. And if you're not willing to be in that position, you won't take it and you may not be successful. So in Leslie's organization and every other one of her peers' organization, the same process has been embedded, and that's conducted on a quarterly basis. And I guarantee you won't find that in another association, because I didn't find it all that much in my for-profit world either. It just didn't exist. But we take it very seriously. It's all about leadership and people, and we really believe that. And I think that's something we all could stand up and be proud about.
Yeah, and because we owe that to the members. It's their organization. We have to protect it. And if we don't protect it, if we, and I have colleagues that are proud to leave after 30 years being with an association with nobody to take their place.
Tell them a story about the key. Your first CEO job.
Oh, yeah.
Your transition process. Tell me
My transition process, my first CEO was a guy who I respect and admire to this day, but when he left, he said, we have to have a transition meeting. And I felt like I was ready, but I only watched him. We didn't really talk about me being his successor at all. And I go in there and, I have my pad, my pen, and I'm ready to go. And his desk is clean. And he leans forward, he says, here's the key to my desk. And he said, whatever you do, be decisive. And I'm looking at him, and he says, good luck. And that was it. That was transition 101. Now, when you think about it, that's a pretty profound statement. Because what he said was, you may be right, you may be wrong. Worst case is it's a bad mistake. Don't do it again. Do something different. Be decisive. And that was a pretty impressive thing. I thought we'd do a little bit more with Mark and the rest of the staff team. One of the things, and I keep repeating this over and over, and Mark's probably bored with the story, but I think there are two things about Mark. One is his extensive background in business. And I don't think the board was fully aware of that extensive background, which is why the rigor of going through a disciplined search brought all of that out, and why they were blown away with Mark. More so than what they thought going in. Everybody always thinks, how much experience do you have? You have 9 years. He graduated from college when he was 42 years old. No, that's not what happened. He didn't leave home at 42. He had 22 years of extensive, mature experience in business in a variety of applications. That came out. And when I first interviewed Mark, that's what I heard. But the other part that came out in Mark was something that I think all of us have to remember in leadership, and it is about trust. Having a relationship that's both trusting and trustworthy. And we spent the better part of a day just talking about where PMI had to go 2 weeks before I came on board, and what it was going to mean to us. I wasn't even sure I needed a COO and an executive VP. But when I finished that interview, I said, A, I need it, and B, I really believe in him. And that's the thing that I think is the other piece of the social side that I'm talking about. It's about relationships, especially in project management. Looking for the commonalities and strength. How do we work together? Without that, it's a toss. And that, I think that was an influence in why they got Mark. They knew him. They could trust him, and they knew the kind of decision process that he had. So the combination of excellence in business that he brought with him to PMI, and then the kind of trusting and trustworthy relationship that he's built over 9 years was great. So I think we're ready. The transition is seamless. I don't think there's going to be anything that's going to get in the way. Then he's going to be in a very lonely job after that. But the good news is he's got colleagues all over the world that, the association colleagues that you can call up and you go, let me tell you how stupid I think this happened today, or what am I going to do in this situation, or let me pose a hypothetical situation. It didn't really happen to me, but what would you do if this happened to you? That's the kind of thing that I think our colleagues bring us, the peers, the willingness to share your support. So.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
It's always great to see you guys.
Yeah.
And that was the second and final part of our interview with Gregory Balestrero and Mark Langley, recorded at the PMI North American Congress 2010. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. And if you're a project manager who wants to become a PMP, then the easiest way to do so is with another podcast, with our sister podcast, the Project Management Prepcast, and study for the exam by watching over 38 hours of video training from pm-prepcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and you know exactly what I'm going to say now, right? When you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. The real problem is what to do with project managers after the project is managed. Until next time.